My fellow Americans,
You might be wondering, why in the world is there a 30-minute countdown before the show starts? Well, we actually start live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, so this whole 30-minute countdown is a chance for YouTube and Rumble to send out their alerts and notifications, so we encourage you to gather up and hang out with everyone in the chat room. So every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time is when we do this show live. You can join us for the countdown if you like, or just set your clock and reminder that at 4 p.m. Eastern is when we go live. You can also make sure you subscribe and turn on that bell notification, so hopefully you will get a notification.
What do you have to say about dictators of countries like Indonesia, who we sell weapons to, yet they are slaughtering people in East Timor? What do you have to say about Israel, who is slaughtering Palestinians, who impose martial law? What do you have to say about that? Those are our allies. Why do we sell weapons to these countries? Why do we support them? Why do we bomb Iraq when it commits similar problems?
There are various examples of things that are not right in this world, and the United States is trying. I really am surprised that people feel that it is necessary to defend the rights of Saddam Hussein, when what we ought to be thinking about is how to make sure that he does not use weapons of mass destruction.
I'd like to...
Who are shouting? Just a moment.
I'm not defending them in the least. What I am saying is that there needs to be consistent application of U.S. foreign policy. We cannot support people who are committing the same violations because they are political allies. That is not acceptable. We cannot violate UN resolutions when it is convenient to us. You're not answering my question, Madam Albright.
You briefed the press, did you not, when you were there?
Well, I had several jobs. One of my jobs was that of analyst. I also was an interrogator and indeed briefed the press when we, the CIA, wanted to circulate disinformation on a particular issue. Disinformation is not necessarily a lie. It may be a half-truth. And we would pick out a journalist. I would go do the briefing and hope that he would put the information in print.
What was your percentage of success?
We were pretty successful in planning information of a rather rarefied nature. For instance, if we wanted to get across to the American public that the North Vietnamese were building up their force structure in South Vietnam, I would go to a journalist and advise him that in the past 6 months, X number of North Vietnamese forces had come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail system through southern Laos. Now, there is no way a journalist can check that information. That's data derived from radio intercepts, spy in the sky photography. So either he goes with the information or he doesn't, and ordinarily or usually, the journalist would go with it because it looked like some kind of exclusive. Go after these gentlemen. I would be directed to cultivate them, to spend time with them at the Caravel Hotel or the Continental Hotel, to socialize with them, and slowly but surely to try to gain their confidence by dolloping out valid information which was true. And then I would drop into a conversation the data that we wanted to get across, which might not be true. One piece of data, for instance, that we managed to plant in the New Yorker magazine had to do with a supposed North Vietnamese effort in 1973 to develop airfields along the border of South Vietnam. The reason we wanted to plant this information was that we were trying to persuade the U.S. Congress that Saigon should continue to get a great deal of aid, and that the North Vietnamese were the chief violators of the ceasefire accord. That was printed in the New Yorker magazine under the byline of Robert Chaplin, as indeed was a great deal of such information which we tried to circulate.
Frank, a two-part question. What were the objectives of what was the objective of the CIA? What about the moral implications of what you were doing in feeding disinformation? Did the objective override the moral implications, moral problems?
Well, the objective of the agency in general is to generate intelligence and get it back to Washington, to get at the truth and make sure the policymakers understand it. When you plant disinformation, you are diverging from that objective, and I think probably in retrospect, it was very counterproductive. I am, as an ex-CIA agent, opposed to the disinformation activities in which I was involved. I admit that I was involved, and I think it served no useful purpose. Propagandizing the American public or Congress is not the CIA's job. As to the morality of what the CIA was doing or that particular activity, the war was a very relative thing. It was a relativist environment, and morality seldom came into play when you were operating in the field. In my estimation, a CIA man should be amoral. That may sound pretty shocking to somebody, but what if my morality were that of a Nazi or agent, if you will? You wouldn't want me to be your intelligence officer. Keep the morals out of intelligence. Keep the truth in, and stay away from disinformation.
It would have been more appropriate for Mr. Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, to address this House according to Article 144, an article which was specifically designed to debate violations of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, which is clearly the case with Mr. Trudeau. Then again, a Prime Minister who openly admires the Chinese basic dictatorship, who tramples on fundamental rights by persecuting and criminalizing his own citizens as terrorists just because they dared to stand up to his perverted concept of democracy, should not be allowed to speak in this House at all. Mr. Trudeau, you are a disgrace for any democracy. Please spare us your presence. Thank you.
And it might sound radical, colleagues, but the answer to war is not more war, it's peace. And peace isn't delivered by the barrel of a gun, it's delivered by diplomacy, by dialogue. You can wish away your continent's history, but we share a continent with Russia. We will sit down with Russia. There will be a negotiated peace, and this organisation should be promoting it earlier rather than delaying it and making sure that more Ukrainians die. Your feigning of sympathy rings hollow. It makes me sick, to be honest with you.
We become involved when disinformation poses a threat to the security of our country. It is when there's a connectivity to a threat to our country. It could be a threat, a connectivity to violence. And what this working group does, is precisely what I would think you would want it to do, which is to take a look at the work, the disinformation work that our department has done and ask the following questions. Do we have policies? Do we have guardrails? Do we have standards?
But here's the problem. We can't even agree. We can't even agree what disinformation is. You can't even agree that it was disinformation, that the Russians fed information to the Steele dossier. If you can't agree to that, how are we ever going to come to an agreement on what is disinformation so you can police it on social media?
Senator, I have 2 points, if I may finish. Number one, that what this office, what this working group does, because it's not an office, what this working group does is ensure that there are guardrails, definitions, standards to make sure that the free speech rights, the civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy rights of individuals.
So do you think COVID disinformation threatens our national security?
And number two, if I may, Senator, and number two, is it your proposition that when the cartels spread disinformation with respect to our immigration policies to try to lure vulnerable migrants to our border illegally?
I think you've got no idea what disinformation is, and I don't think the government's capable of it. Do you know who the greatest propagator of disinformation in the history of the world is? The U.S. government. Are you familiar with McNamara, the Pentagon Papers? Are you familiar with George W. Bush and the weapons of mass destruction? Are you familiar with Iran-Contra? I mean, think of all the debates and disputes we've had over the last 50 years in our country. We work them out by debating them. We don't work them out by the government being the arbiter. I don't want guardrails. I want you to have nothing to do with speech. You think we can't determine, speech by traffickers is disinformation? You think the American people are so stupid they need you to tell them what the truth is? You can't even admit what the truth is with the Steele dossier. I don't trust government to figure out what the truth is. Government is largely disseminating disinformation.
You would know this this is a bit of an aside, but in terms of how you think about problem sets, when I was a cadet, what's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses.
We had a good discussion on ensuring global energy security and adequate oil supplies to support global economic growth, and that will begin shortly. I'm doing all I can to increase the supply for the United States of America, which I expect to happen. The Saudis share that urgency, and based on our discussions today, I expect we'll see further steps in the coming weeks.
Are you worried about
Hey everyone, just as a reminder, our show starts at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, just a few minutes from now, but I should remind you that we have a daily newsletter. It's totally free. Natalie and I work very hard on it every morning over a cup of coffee, putting the stories together that we think are important that the mainstream media is going to ignore. All you need to do is go to our website. It's just redacted.inc. Put in your email address. We won't ever sell your email to anybody. And then you'll receive a welcome email, and all you need to do is verify that email, and 7 a.m. Eastern Time is when we send out our daily newsletter. And it's about 5 or 10 minutes in length that you can read it over your cup of coffee. And like I said, we cover 4 or 5 of the big stories of the day, plus a couple of things you might have missed while you were sleeping. We try to have some fun with it, add a little humor into it. And again, it's a great way to start off your morning. But it's also a great way for us to stay connected with you as well, because we've been banned and blocked on some of these platforms before, where we haven't been allowed to post anything, not even a community post. So the only way for us to stay connected with you is through our newsletter. We were able to send out a newsletter and say, hey everyone, we're blocked for the next week, and let you know what was actually going on with our show. Anyway, go to redacted.inc and sign up for the free newsletter, and it'll be posted first thing in the morning over your cup of coffee.
One of the hopeful things that I've discovered is that nearly every war that has started in the past 50 years has been a result of media lies. The media could have stopped it if they had searched deep enough. If they hadn't reprinted government propaganda, they could have stopped it. But what does that mean? Well, that means basically populations don't like wars. And populations have to be fooled into wars. Populations don't willingly and with open eyes go into a war. So if we have a good media environment, then we'll also have a peaceful environment.
You killed a million people in Iraq.
That is a separate...
You killed a million people in Iraq. It's incredible that you have the brass neck to be sitting here now urging another Iraq war.
George,
after
if
what
I
you've
was
already
still in
done.
Parliament,
There can be no doubt that Saddam Hussein has biological weapons and the capability to rapidly produce more, many more. And he has the ability to dispense these lethal poisons and diseases in ways that can cause massive death and destruction. If biological weapons seem too terrible to contemplate, chemical weapons are equally chilling. UNMOVIC already laid out much of this, and it is documented for all of us to read in UNSCOM's 1999 report on the subject. If we consider just one category of missing weaponry, 6,500 bombs from the Iran-Iraq war, UNMOVIC says the amount of chemical agent in them would be in the order of 1,000 tons. These quantities of chemical weapons are now unaccounted for. Dr. Blick says, quipped that, quote, mustard gas is not marmalade. You are supposed to know what you did with it. We believe Saddam Hussein knows what he did with it, and he has not come clean with the international community. We have evidence these weapons existed. What we don't have is evidence from Iraq that they have been destroyed or where they are. That is what we are still waiting for.
Okay, inspection worth doing, everybody's agreed it's worth doing, and it gets stopped.
Yes, sir.
At that moment, we're an automatic pilot as far as you're concerned. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, I respect that. But now, it seems to me the Secretary of State might have a slightly different problem. Secretary of State might be sitting there and saying, now look over there on that side. Now, I remember so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and the 12 people on this side, they're all the ones that said they didn't want to use force. Now, I'm going to have to go tell the president now that we should, or Secretary Cohen, unleash whatever it takes to get it done. And our military assessment is the same as the majors. The majors' assessment is, privately held but publicly acknowledged later, that airstrikes alone aren't going to do this. Saddam's not going to cave on this. So, now here's the deal. I recommended the president have at it and let the chips fall where they may. A reasonable position for the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State to take. But I respectfully suggest, Major, I respectfully suggest they have a responsibility slightly above your pay grade. Slightly above your pay grade. To decide whether or not to take the nation to war alone, or to take the nation to war partway, or to take the nation to war halfway. That's a real tough decision. That's why they get paid the big bucks. That's why they get the limos and you don't. I mean this sincerely. I'm not trying to be flip, because I think, and that's why I said at the outset, the reason why I'm glad you did what you did, we should come to our milk. We should make a decision. But in terms of whether the Secretary of State has no more to consider than you do as the arms inspector. You didn't get in, didn't get my job done, get me in. Period. You made the deal, right? That's the deal. A deal's a deal. Get me in. Scott Ritter, I'm ready to go. It's not how it works. Now, maybe it should work that way. But wouldn't you acknowledge that if you were President of the United States or the Secretary of State, you'd sit there and say, now, okay, old Scotty boy didn't get in. We said he should get in. We want him to get in. It's important that he does get in. They're not going to let him in, so what are we going to do now? We know that France and Russia aren't going to be with us. We're quite confident China's not. We've already run those traps. They're not there. We're not sure where the United States Senate is, but have at it, boys. Go get them. And by the way, Scott and the boys say air power's not enough. I think it's a legitimate debate, Scott, Major. I think it's a legitimate debate. But I don't think we should be putting it in the context of you have somebody up there at state saying, look, how can we weasel out of this agreement? We want to let this guy out there hanging. We're not this. It's a very practical political decision. Same kind of decision General Powell made. Same kind of decision President Bush made. Every president, every Secretary of State has to do it. Like I said, they get paid more than you. Their job's a hell of a lot more complicated than yours. They may have made the wrong decision, and you brought it to light. We should address it. We should say straight up where we are, and we should do it. And for that, I thank you. But it's above your pay grade.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon, and one of the generals called me, and he said, "Sir, you got to come in and talk to me a sec." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." I said, "We're going to war with Iraq? Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper. He said, "I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
Hey everyone, Clayton here. The show is going to start at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. I should remind you that we have a VIP community. It's our Redacted Rebel VIP community. Now, this show is totally free, what you're watching right now, right? You can subscribe here on YouTube and Rumble, totally free. But if you'd like to support independent journalism, we are run by you. Without you guys, we wouldn't be able to do this show. We wouldn't be able to hire the team that we have. We wouldn't be able to afford the servers that we have. We wouldn't be able to afford the reporters that we have, the team that we have. So you can support us by going to redacted.inc, and on the right side of your screen, you'll see a VIP community button. Just click that, and for the price of a cup of coffee once a month, you can support us. We put out exclusive content, early interviews that no one else will see, live streams just for our VIP Rebel community. So again, it's totally free to watch this show, but if you do want to support independent journalism, we would really appreciate it. Come on over to redacted.inc, click on that community button, and decide if you want to sign up or not. It's totally up to you. We thank you. And meanwhile, the show will start in just a few moments at 4 p.m. Eastern Time.
Well, one of the 4 principal functions of the CIA is to gather intelligence and ideally forward it to the president, the users of information, the policymakers, as they say. There are other functions, however, some of them more legitimate than others. One is to run secret wars, the covert action that's written and talked about so much, like what's happening in Nicaragua today from Honduras. Another thing is to disseminate propaganda to influence people's minds, and this is a major function of the CIA. And unfortunately, of course, it overlaps into the gathering of information. You have contact with a journalist, you will give him true stories, you'll get information from him, you'll also give him false stories. For example, in my war, the Angola war that I helped to manage, 1/3 of my staff was propaganda. Ironically, it's called covert action inside the CIA. Outside, that means the violent part. I had propagandists all over the world, principally in London, Kinshasa and Zambia. We would take stories which we would write and put them in the Zambia Time, and then pull them out and send them to a journalist on our payroll in Europe. But his cover story, you see, would be that he'd gotten them from his stringer in Lusaka, who had gotten them from the Zambia Time. We had the complicity of the government of Zambia, Kenneth Kaunda, if you will, to put these false stories into his newspapers. But after that point, the journalists, Reuters and AFP, the management was not witting of it. Now, our contact man in Europe was, and we pumped just dozens of stories about Cuban atrocities, Cuban rapists. In one case, we had the Cuban rapists caught and tried by the Ovimbundu maidens who had been their victims, and then we ran photographs that made almost every newspaper in the country of the Cubans being executed by the Ovimbundu women who supposedly had been their victims.
These were fake photos?
Oh, absolutely. We didn't know of one single atrocity committed by the Cubans. It was pure, raw, false propaganda to create an illusion of communists, eating babies for breakfast and that sort of totally false propaganda.
The only reason that I'm allowed to ask you this question is because today the federal court ruled that the government doesn't have the right to determine who is or is not a journalist. This is the second election in a row that the court had to overturn your government. Do you still insist on being able to make that decision, and why?
First of all, questions around accreditation were handled by the press gallery and the consortium of networks who have strong perspectives on quality journalism and the important information that is shared with Canadians. The reality is organizations like yours that continue to spread misinformation and disinformation on the science around vaccines, around how we're going to actually get through this pandemic and be there for each other and keep our kids safe, is part of why we're seeing such unfortunate anger and lack of understanding of basic science. And quite frankly, I won't call it a media organization, your group of individuals need to take accountability for some of the polarization that we're seeing in this country. And I think Canadians are cluing into the fact that there is a really important decision we take about the kind of country we want to see. And I salute all extraordinary, hardworking journalists that put science and facts at the heart of what they do and ask me tough questions every day, but make sure that they are educating and informing Canadians from a broad range of perspectives, which is the last thing that you guys do.
Whatever our hopes may be for the future, for reducing this threat or living with it, there is no escaping either the gravity or the totality of its challenge to our survival and to our security. A challenge that confronts us in unaccustomed ways in every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society two requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the President. Two requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome, everybody, to Redacted on this Monday. Is it Monday?
It's Monday.
Holy smokes. Holy smokes. It feels like it could be a Thursday. I only wish it was. Hey, welcome to the big show. We've got a jam-packed show for you on this Monday. Colonel Douglad MacGregor is going to be joining us in mere moments to talk about the very latest developments, something he accurately predicted, actually, just a few short days ago, about the number of troops amassing at certain key points along attack points from the Russian army. We're going to look at the very latest on Ukraine.
Plus, we're going to talk about the Trippledemic that the media is warning us about. It is like a banana split, if you will, of all things that they have a vaccine for: RSV, COVID, and flu. We're going to talk about what we're being warned for. What are the vaccines on the market for those things that the media is unabashedly telling you to go and get? And what are the clinical trials, or what are the data behind those vaccines? Is that a good thing to do? We're going to break that down. Plus, Stanford openly holding panels about Nazis. Stanford also has all kinds of cancel culture. But if it is warmongering or Nazi promoting, no cancel culture. It's all good. We're going to bring you that story as well.
And we're also going to talk about 9/11 and a family that has been fighting to get answers for one of their family members who passed away tragically on that day, and by all accounts was murdered on that day, and been trying to get answers. The inquest that they've been pushing for inside the United Kingdom has come to a screeching halt, but now they are appealing that process. And could we actually get some answers on what brought down those towers? All of that and more as Redacted starts right now. How's everyone doing around the world? Let us know where you're joining us from. We are live. It is 4 p.m. Eastern time. We are here every day, Monday through Thursday. We do take the Fridays off like Johnny Carson, and because, sanity purposes.
Yeah.
But yeah, let us know.
There's only so much truth a human body can handle.
I know.
We can't get through it all that much.
Yeah, you do need to decompress sometimes.
Yes, Clayton and I, our kids are away at summer camp, so we went to dinner tonight. We had a very quiet dinner, and we talked about, what is our vision for this show? What is our, marching orders? And it is just truth, whether it's convenient or not. We just want to cover the things that the mainstream media will ignore. And we spend our days doing that. So that's what you've come here. As a reminder, we alternate segments. So some segments will be more Clayton, some me.
Okay.
Sometimes when we break these up, I hear the comments saying, boy, she's talking a lot. That's because that will be my segment. And also, I remind you that we are not brother and sister. We're a married couple.
That's right.
So the bickering comes in that paradigm sometimes.
That's right. So we do have a store we want to tell you about. And by the way, if you'd like to support independent journalism and what we do here, we are not supported by George Soros. We are not funded by anybody, Rupert Murdoch or otherwise. So please, you can come over to our store, redactedstore.com, grab some fun merch. And we really do not mark the prices up at all. We really try to keep them near at cost prices to get everything printed and shipped out to you. So some fantastic hoodies and mugs, some great hats, like my dog walking hat there, my gray one that I love wearing. So anyway, redactedstore.com is where you can go to support us and to be able to have on great guests like our next guest, Colonel Douglad MacGregor. Well, reports today of major advancements for the Russian forces and breaking through what's left of the Ukrainian army. Breakthrough spots are being reported, frankly, all over the place. Someone who predicted this would happen is Colonel Douglad MacGregor. In fact, a few days ago, wrote a new column, a new piece, so he put it down in print and said this, quote, "Today, more than 100,000 Russian troops are conducting offensive operations along the Lyman-Kupiansk axis. These forces include 900 tanks, 555 artillery systems, 370 multiple rocket launchers. It doesn't take much imagination to anticipate the breakthrough of these forces to the north, where they can then encircle Kharkiv." And Colonel Douglad MacGregor joins us now. So it appears, Colonel, that you were spot on looking into your crystal ball a few days ago. This amassing of forces appears that these breakthroughs have been happening over the past 24 hours in multiple spots. Not a surprise to you, though.
No, but I think all of this is pointing to a series of developments that we now have to look at carefully. Vilnius gave us a glimpse. What we saw at Vilnius was the Europeans have had it with Ukraine. Let's be frank. They are at a point now where they realize Ukraine cannot win. That's no longer a secret. And it was obvious from the body language and from some of the statements that the Europeans are looking for an off-ramp. The real question at this point is whether or not the Biden administration is looking for an off-ramp. I rather suspect they are. And why? The Ukrainian army is beginning to melt away. People need to understand that at some point, every army that goes to war at some point reaches the breaking point. In other words, it cracks under pressure. My friend Mike Vlahos, he and I discussed this war last December, and a lot of people enjoyed that discussion. But that's one of the points that he raises routinely with me. How much more can these Ukrainians take? When you're faced with overwhelming superiority and firepower, when you live essentially in a fishbowl. Remember, they've got constant, persistent surveillance from space-based assets as well as terrestrial assets. There's nowhere to hide. And if you concentrate in any number anywhere, you can be targeted, and ultimately some system, whether it sits in the Black Sea, whether it's inside Russia, whether it's inside southern Ukraine, or even up in Belarus, they can find you and strike you. So I think what we're watching is the disintegration of the Ukrainian military. Well, what do we do about it? I mean, that's the question. I think the opportunity for real escalation on NATO, on the side of NATO, is now no longer possible. And after all, where are our inventories of ammunition? How much ammunition have we got? What kind of medical infrastructure exists that could evacuate wounded? More important, how many ready combat formations do we have? I think the answers are all very, very negative. And under those circumstances, there's not a whole heck of a lot we can do. And then you have these outliers. The Poles, the Lithuanians keep insisting, well, we can go into Western Ukraine and, we'll gather territory that was once part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth that went out of business in 1794. And Putin has responded very negatively, saying, well, if you come in under the NATO umbrella, you'll never leave. In other words, we'll bury you where you stand. And that's a pretty serious response, and it's one that everybody should take seriously. So I hope that people in Washington recognize two things. Ukraine has already lost the war. This is not going to be won. Ukraine is disintegrating. Its armed forces are falling apart. They're not bad people. They're not bad soldiers. They've done all that is humanly possible. The hundreds of thousands of dead and casualties is simply too much. All the hospitals are full. How many people they've got left that they could throw at the advancing Russians is anybody's guess, but I don't think it's very much. So the question now is, what do we do? Do we let this continue? How many more have to die before we finally say enough's enough? That's really where I think we are at this point.
You had a number of reports recently in the past 24, 48 hours about United States weapons that are pouring into Ukraine have overwhelmingly wound up on the black market. The Biden administration appears to, I'd like to think that they're looking for an off-ramp, but it appears that they continue to want to making these exceptions to send cluster munitions, which this weekend were raining down on journalists, killing journalists. I had one journalist who told me he made it out barely. His friend was killed because of these cluster munitions by Ukraine from the United States. Make no mistake about it. And so we continue to push this stuff in there into this meat grinder. For what purpose? So it appears, and then you have the Wall Street Journal this morning, a headline, Ukraine's lack of weaponry and training risks stalemate in fight with Russia. Risks a stalemate, right? They have a lack of weaponry. What do you make of this? So do you think that there's really an off-ramp for the Biden administration, or are they going to continue to throw more weapons down this drain?
Well, there's no stalemate coming, that's for sure, because the Ukrainians are losing and the Russians are advancing, and the Russians can go all the way to the river, and if necessary, they can cross the river. Their mobilization, by the way, continues at a very steady pace. It's not being covered publicly, but more and more and more men in various universities, in various technical institutes, in places where they would normally be working are missing. They're showing up in uniform. So the Army continues to grow. Right now, the numbers of troops are about 750,000. You're talking about 300,000 of those in reserve. And a target number is 1.2 million before this is over. So Russia is waxing, more and more powerfully with each passing day. So there will be no stalemate. The war is lost. Now, are we going to continue to send aid? I think at some point it will be suspended, but no one wants to say, gosh, I guess we were wrong, Morris. Russia was weak, or so we thought. I guess it's not. They're not incompetent. They're not stupid. And the other question will come up is, why has this taken so long for the Russians to finally move on the offensive? Well, Putin has always been extremely sensitive to taking any action that could lead to a confrontation between the United States and Russia. He doesn't want that. He doesn't want a confrontation with NATO, but he knows that ultimately that means us. That's the last thing in the world he wants. He's always wanted to get to the negotiating table, come to some sort of solution, and return to normalcy. We are the ones with our sidekicks in London who continually insist that there can be no negotiated solution. Well, if there's no negotiated solution, you just keep marching west. That's the Russian answer. And people say, oh, well, that can't happen. What do you mean it can't happen? What's going to stop them? That's the point. There is nothing out there right now. And if we decide to tell the Poles privately, okay, stick your toe in the water, cross the border, go to Lvov, what's going to happen? I think Lvov could easily end up being leveled. And the troops that try to come across, unless they are heavily defended by air and missile defense systems, they're going to be blown to smithereens.
And then you have this question, which you and I were speaking about offline, which is these 8 Russian generals being removed. So I know we're trying to wrap our heads around exactly what's happening here. So this is on the Russian side now. Reports over the weekend of Russian moved from command by General Shoigu. And I'll just mention a few of the names that I can even pronounce here. Well, I'll try my best. Like General Mikhail Tablinski. You have, I'm not going to even try this. But a number of
Popov.
Popov.
That's fairly easy to pronounce.
Gostev.
He was one of these general officers who was extremely popular with his troops. Well, there are a number of different possibilities, and we're still trying to sort through this. I think, first of all, as soon as I heard about these 8 generals, some of whom, like Popov, are being removed for probably being overly aggressive. They seem to have been in the corner complaining about the slowness with which the Russians are approaching this war. They would like to see this thing terminated on terms that are created on the battlefield. In other words, let us go and finish the job kind of thing. If that's true, then I think we should offer up at least 8 of our Army generals right now. We'll make the switch because I'll bring them over here and put them to work. They'll do an infinitely better job than our generals because at least they'll be aggressive fighters. I don't know what's happening. I think that some of this has to do with Mr. Shoigu, who is the Minister of Defense. Some of it has to do with General Gerasimov, the Chief of the General Staff. Remember that Vladimir Putin is very close to both of those men. And those men have had difficulty with several of these generals from time to time. Whether or not this is justified or unjustified, I have no idea. But whenever you see general officers removed, or better, killed in combat, believe it or not, that's a healthy sign of a military establishment at war, because it means that someone is being removed for doing something that was either wrong or not turning in the right results. In other words, people are being held accountable for what they do. That's good. If they get killed, that is an inspiration to soldiers. I can tell you that from having seen that repeatedly in history. Every time a general officer is reported killed or wounded, soldiers are sort of enraged at the enemy because they're proud of the fact that their commander was sharing the danger with them. We don't seem to get that here in the United States. We think, oh, well, generals are supposed to be remote from the battlefield because we can't afford to lose any. If we lose, their big brains will lose the war. Well, that always turns out to be nonsense because, as Charles de Gaulle said, cemeteries are filled with indispensable men. So you can always find more talent, but we seem to overlook that. So we don't really know what's happening, but I suggest it's a little of all of the above. Some of these people have been a little too outspoken in their criticism. Some of these people haven't done their jobs to the satisfaction of people above them. But, to say that this is evidence for an imminent collapse on the Russian side is absurd.
And I'll get you out of here on this, Colonel. We just learned a few minutes ago that Ukraine vows that they will continue to attack Moscow with continued drone attacks. This coming in from the Telegraph just a short time ago. Moscow was hit several times over the weekend This has been ongoing. That Russian Defense Ministry building is believed to be the headquarters where this was targeted. No one was injured in the strikes, but Ukraine says they're going to continue these drone attacks against Moscow. What do you make of this?
These are acts of desperation. You know, the two key words to describe the situation right now in Ukraine are very straightforward. One is desperation. The other is disintegration. Ukrainians are desperate. The Ukrainian government is. And they will do anything that they can with whatever they have to sort of strike back at Russia. The problem for them, of course, is this sort of thing doesn't help them at all. It makes matters far worse. And they're not focusing their attention on the forces in front of them that are breaking through and entering their country. That's where they should be focused. You kill the enemy that you've got in front of you. If you don't kill him, it doesn't matter what happens anywhere else, you're going to lose the fight. Well, they're losing that fight. And they can't even get their soldiers to stand and fight anymore because, frankly, they're tired of dying. And they're questioning the wisdom of doing it anymore because they don't trust the leadership in Kiev. I don't think they trust their own general officers. They don't trust their brigade commanders. They don't trust most of their officers. I think that's a huge problem right now on the ground for the Ukrainians.
And I should clarify, they say they're going to vow further attacks on Moscow and Crimea. So... Which, you know, if you want to win the hearts and minds of the people of Crimea back over again, the best way to win those people over is by bombing and killing them, I suppose.
Well, Crimea is the hub for a lot of military power that the Russians have, and they know that. But it's not going to change, you know, the outcome. I mean, this is sort of the final act of defiance.
Yeah.
So I think what we ought to be thinking about right now is how do we bring this to some form of closure? What do you do about this man, Zelensky? I mean, he's done everything the globalists and neocons wanted him to do. He's marched hundreds of thousands of his countrymen into war to be killed or wounded. He's maintained the fiction that he was winning and Ukraine would triumph for how long now? 560 days? What are you going to do with him? Can he negotiate an end to this war? Seems unlikely to me. So I would watch and see what now happens with Zelensky and the people around him. Because if this is going to end before Ukraine as a nation state completely goes out of existence, someone in Ukrainian uniform probably has to step forward and take responsibility and ask for some sort of ceasefire and withdraw to some lines that people make on maps until talks can be arranged in Moscow or wherever they decide to hold them, probably back in Belarus, I would suspect.
I think you're spot on about this. As usual, Colonel Douglad MacGregor, thank you for the piece that you just wrote as well over at the Kennedy Beacon on Substack. We'll link it up in the description below. A number of really great points in this piece. And thank you, as always, for your analysis. And I think that is the ultimate question. What happens towards this off-ramp, and how can we move away from this without sending more people to die and more munitions that are going to be used against journalists and civilians? That's where things are winding up. Colonel, great to see you. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you, Morris.
All right. Mr. Morris.
Mr. Morris and Morris's. Thank you so much, Colonel. Always great to see the Colonel. Yeah, so thank you guys so much for subscribing. I should mention, I know Rumble has added some new features. We're live on Rumble. There's a subscribe button feature now underneath the chat, which you can subscribe right to our VIP community right there. And you can also still just join and follow us for free. But if you'd like to subscribe and become part of our VIP community, you can do that as well. Just thought I'd mention that.
It actually looks like it's separate of that.
Oh, okay. It's a new feature.
Yeah, I don't think it's a new feature. I don't think it's tied to locals at all. So it doesn't appear to be. I just clicked on it and it does. So I'm not really sure. I'll have to do some investigating.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I wonder if it's like the members on YouTube, if it's something like that.
I believe.
Okay.
All right.
So if anybody's brave and wants to try it and let us know what happens, hey, thank you.
Yeah, be brave, be bold. Well, thank you for that. And if you subscribe to the show while we're live, like Donald King, he just donated $2. Thank you so much, and became a subscriber up here on the big board. When you do that live, your name will pop up here on the big board. So thank you so much. We've got more news to get to here on this Monday. We're going to look at NBC News is calling what we're about to face in the winter the new Trippledemic. The new COVID is back with a vengeance, and you need to go out and get.
It brought friends.
Yeah, you need to go out and get like 3 shots. That's what NBC News wants you to do. So we're going to tell you all about that. Plus, we're going to have one of the family members of a 9/11 victim on the show who is demanding answers from the government. And this is moving its way through the court system in the UK. Now that the family has received the remains of their son and their brother back in the UK, what brought down those towers on 9/11? And the overwhelming evidence may shatter the narrative that we've all been told. So we're going to have that story on the show in just mere moments. But first, we want to tell you about our friends over at 4 Patriots, because in a startling description, the UN food chief warned the world with the words, knocking on famine's door. He called what we're facing a perfect storm of a perfect storm. And he's not alone. Barron's published that a food shortage could be coming, even in the U.S. Now, we've seen politicians politicizing the availability of food in different regions. You don't know how this can affect you. So now is a good time to start focusing on collecting your survival food. It's more important now than ever, not just because of the political climate, but also for natural disasters as well. I'm from San Francisco, and we always had to have an earthquake kit, and that's something you need to keep up with, refresh, make sure it's fully stocked. So right now you can create your own stockpile of the best-selling products with the 4 Patriots Survival Food Kits. It's not ordinary food. We're talking about food that's good for 25 years of super survival food, hand-packed in a family-owned facility in the USA, giving jobs to over 200 Americans. They have different delicious breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, and you can make these meals in less than 20 minutes. Just add boiling water, simmer, and serve. And right now, just for the next few days, listeners of Redacted will get 10% off their first order at 4patriots.com by using the code REDACTED. So go to 4patriots.com and use the code REDACTED to start your stockpile today. All right, well, don't get comfortable that we're out of the pandemic yet, because we have a new variant of COVID, plus what NBC News is calling a trippledemic. Trippledemic. Yeah, I said it. Trippledemic.
It's a trippledemic. It's a triple-decker.
And they're saying, get ready for winter. It's going to be a brutal winter, and you better get all of your shots. Good old NBC News labeling it, giving us, it's like how the Weather Channel labels storms,
Yes. Tell them that's like it's a marketing
ploy.
Marketing move. So if you have named storm coverage in your insurance, just because the news gives it a name does not necessarily mean the official governing bodies do. So you want to know that distinction, because that's just, if the Weather Channel names a storm, it's because they want to sell you coverage of that storm. Well, we have lots of coverage and things to sell you around the trippledemic. This is a 1-2-3 punch. Now, here is the headline of how they're selling it. They said, I need to be ready for another trippledemic. Well, the word another makes me feel a little better, because that means we've all, if we're watching this, we've already survived one. It's a trifecta of COVID, flu, and RSV, which we were told we went through last year. And what does NBC, in their benevolence and totally non-conflicted advice, suggest? Vaccine up, of course, because lucky us, there is now a vaccine for one of each of those things. Take a look at the way they cover this. They say that this means Americans may be urged to, or will be urged to get 3 different shots, COVID, RSV, and the annual flu shot. Although we're going to go over the RSV shot, there's only one for elderly people and babies, and one for pregnant people in the works. So that's not for everybody, even though they are saying we all need this. Now, the head of this infectious disease unit at Vanderbilt is saying, that's going to be hard because we have to learn to deliver those vaccines. And some people may be wary of getting 3 shots at once. And combining flu and COVID doesn't appear to reduce the effectiveness of either shot, but she says there's limited data suggesting that adding RSV to the mix lessens the response. There's no data. By limited data, she means no data.
Limited.
0.
Limited or 0. We're going to go with limited.
They're literally a 0. We went through last week in detail the clinical trials of the RSV vaccine we've gone through the one that's a therapeutic. It's a shot, not a vaccine for babies. And we've been through the one that is for elderly people. They were only tested based on contraction of RSV, not severity, not length, and definitely not based on other things. So there's no data. So just when you see that limited, just know that that means 0. Now, other than that, we talked about just the one for small babies, the one for 65 and older. There is also one in the works for pregnant women, but vaccine trials stopped because of a 5 to 7% risk of neonatal death. Funny how that article left that out, right? See right here where it tells us about RSV vaccines coming. For the first time this fall, it says we're going to have all of these vaccines. The monoclonal antibody shot for babies. The third up for approval has the potential risk to drastically reduce the virus in infants, and then the older adults one we already have. Well, again, nothing here is suggesting that there might be anything dangerous about these, even though the data that we've gone through from the FDA's own website from their clinical trials does suggest that. We've covered them at length, but before we just kind of go over it, let's remember that RSV for young children at least has a high survivability rate. It's less than 1% of people who get RSV who are otherwise healthy will die of it. Here's a study we went through last week. Most recently, that in a study of 42 studies, so thousands of children, showed that only 2 otherwise healthy children died of RSV. So they're saying the death rate in 42 studies of thousands of children was as low as 0.01% death rate or even lower. So you survive RSV. Most people do pretty okay with it, unless you have something else to consider. But the vaccine trials were mostly for, let's go over it. Now, again, I want to point out that I know how serious RSV can be. I had a baby with RSV. Here's my baby when she's now 11. When she was 7 months old, had RSV, was hospitalized, and thankfully did fairly well. But it was scary to think of a small baby with this. So you don't want it, but with good treatment, you will fare well with it. So now the 3 shots that we have. The first one is Beyfortus. This one's for small babies. Again, not a vaccine, but at least one baby did die in the clinical trial, and 2 other clinical trials were done, but data was not released. The FDA linked to one clinical trial that showed many adverse events, including the baby that died and several heart attacks in babies. The other 2 clinical trials showed these results. No results found, so we can't see. They're telling us how effective it was, but not how dangerous. Here's the second one. They just don't show it. So we don't know. And it doesn't matter now because the FDA gave this a fast track approval, meaning they don't have to show us. And they never will. And
the journalism around this has been incredibly lazy. So NBC, CNN, who've covered this particular story, particularly, and This American Life covering covering vaccines, but even like the RSV story specifically, they're just complete laziness about it.
They just absolutely don't look at the clinical trials. They just say, here you go. Here's another one I want to show you of a local news anchor who was covering Arexvy, which is the one that has been approved for adults 65 and over. We went over these clinical trials in depth, but here's what she has to tell you. She's going to flat out lie to you. Watch.
People in studies only experienced mild side effects like pain at the injection site. Children are also at risk for RSV, but so far they're not included in the FDA vaccine approval. There is currently an antibody treatment in the works for kids. Back to you.
Okay, that's a lie.
And that dress doubles as a parachute.
That's a really bad dress and a lie. 11 people died in clinical trials. So when she said, people had mild symptoms like soreness or fatigue, no, that's wrong. 11 people died in that clinical trial. Maybe she didn't read it. Pfizer admitted that they gave people over 17,000 doses of Arexvy and had at least 10% with serious adverse events and were successful in preventing only 12 cases of RSV. They followed patients for a year, but only reported side effects for 1 month. And in those adverse events were deaths, 11 of them, and many more side effects than that woman in the poofy dress cared to mention at all. In fact, she didn't mention any, not one negative side effect except kind of being sad about getting a shot. Go ahead, Philip.
Well, I mean, maybe these were mild cases of severe reactions and death, like just mild death and mild severe reaction.
Mild.
I mean, that's my interpretation.
Mild case of severe and death. Yeah.
Yes.
Just mild.
Right.
When people die, it's just a mild case. It's just a mild adverse event.
It was a mild death.
Yeah.
I guess that's the way to go.
Right.
Is an adverse
I would love to know how much her station makes from the pharmaceutical companies and the pharmaceutical industry to have like a sponsored health watch segment, a sponsored medical watch segment brought to you by Pfizer. All of those segments are brought to you by the big pharmaceutical companies.
Right. And so if she were to say, hey, they think it prevented 70% fewer cases of RSV, but there is a high rate of death and adverse events. So you decide, given the fact that you mostly survive RSV, they'd be like, it would be literally like, yank. But that's the truth. She, again, either didn't read it or chose to mislead you. You choose which one is true.
I mean, and what's the difference now between flu, COVID, and RSV to begin with?
Well, let's table that question while we just finish this RSV. I want to stay on point.
Let's table
good question. Okay.
Putting it on the table.
Yeah. Now, as for the RSV vaccine for pregnant women, watch how Yahoo News covers this.
Later in the third trimester is when it seemed to have the best efficacy, as well as strongest protection up to 30 days versus after that. Now, Pfizer is competing with GlaxoSmithKline for RSV vaccines. We did note specifically that GSK actually dropped out or paused their phase 3 because of certain safety signals, which you can see, of course, indicated in those votes there. Specifically on preterm births, Pfizer noted 5.6% in their vaccine group versus 4.7% in placebo. GlaxoSmithKline noted 6.8% in their vaccine group versus 4.9% in placebo. So the placebo numbers are pretty close. They also do have some similar indications. One major difference is that GlaxoSmithKline's group also had neonatal deaths reported. So that was a significant safety signal as well. That's what started that pause.
Okay, so between 5 and 7% chance of preterm births and neonatal deaths. But that reporter was like, but some bad things happened in the placebo, so that was okay, and hopefully we'll get there. Like, she's rooting for this without, again, addressing the point that people survive RSV. So we're given this 0.01% chance of not surviving RSV versus 5 to 7% chance of neonatal deaths. And she's like, hopefully we get there. Like, never is that calculation going to work out if you're a pregnant woman. I would think, and I've been a pregnant woman several times. Go ahead, David.
Are they planning to give the vaccine to the mother while she's pregnant, and then when the baby's born, give it to the baby again?
No. So, well, I don't know if anybody would be given that as an option. The way they're sort of presenting it is that once we get this pregnant mommy one, we don't have to give the antibody shot to the babies anymore. We're only giving them that because the pregnant mommy one has not been approved. But who's to say that they won't try and do both? If there's money there, then maybe they would, right?
Vicky Fluke in our chat says, how the hell are these vaccines allowed to be continued?
Again, because especially the one for the babies was given fast track. So they don't need to go over any more regulatory hurdles. They're done. Fast track approval means 3 clinical trials and we're done, and we don't have to publish the other 2.
This is what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is very vocal about. It's the safety of these. Wouldn't we all want these to go through a process of rigorous testing before we roll them out on babies?
Right.
He the other day at that hearing, he said, I'm not anti-vax. Yeah. Everyone in this room thinks that I'm anti-vax because that's the narrative that's been foisted upon you. But I'm here to say I want the safety. So fast tracking these things, not going through the typical safety protocols.
Which happens at an increasing rate. Now, it was a very convenient narrative to say, hey, during lockdowns, we didn't see RSV. It resurfaced because lockdowns were lifted, and now we all need to be scared of it. So it sort of created this fear of RSV without telling us the fact that, again, it has a very high survivability rate. Again, as a mom who sat with a baby with RSV in the intensive care, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. But in terms of the buffet of things that she could have had, I was grateful that that was what we had and that there was treatment for it. So I'm not saying all biopharma is bad. Obviously, they treated my baby. But again, we're not being given the real data for this. And we're being asked to be scared of something that we otherwise may not be scared of.
Hold on, David, because here a good chat question here from Alum Rush over on Rumble, says, why the fast track?
They just say they see a need in the marketplace and they want to quickly fill it. They think it's just that serious.
Well, because if you time it together with the fear, right, David? Like if you time it together with these news articles, we've got a triple-demic.
Right.
We've got to get this out the door fast. So to Alam's point, why the fast track? It's because they're like timing this so that we can roll out all of these news articles and scare the crap out of you and then force you to go get these things at your local pharmacy. And these companies make billions of dollars. Go ahead, David.
And that's the thing. But also it's like they know that if they can get it fast track, because the thing is once they come out with these things, the patent is the most important thing. And so patents only last so long. So they like to maximize their profits. So they want that medication out there as soon as the patent is approved. So they've circumvented, like it used to be a very long circle that every drug had to go through to get approval. Now they've cut that in half. Now they're doing the fast track thing. So these companies get that out as soon as possible. So they get that patent, they get approval, and they're making money before any trial data is in there. You know, it's like, oh, we'll pull it. If people start dying, we'll just pull it. You know, they have that kind of mentality. And the thing that makes me mad is that people look at them like they're trying to help us. They are not. They're only worried about profits. Do they end up helping some people? Potentially, yes, but that is not their motivation.
Right. And Gibinia in the Rumble chat says, why not give these antibodies to all humans and not just babies? Well, you can see because they've chosen these two vulnerable groups that we can be the most scared of that do become hospitalized for RSV more often because those of us in the middle age ranges, we don't typically need treatment for RSV if we contract it. So they're just selling to their audience. They know their avatar, I would say. Now, again, the media keeps telling us that these are effective, long-acting RSV vaccines and shots. Again, there's no test for that. They only did clinical trials on the positivity rate of testing for RSV. They did not test for the severity of RSV if somebody got it. And they did not test for whether or not you were hospitalized. They only tested on contraction rates and not even for a long amount of time. They only followed up on these people for at least 1 year or 1 month, depending on the trial. So when they say they're long-acting and lessen the severity of RSV, they don't know that. That's a lie. Those trials did not cover those things, so don't fall for that. Now, as for the flu vaccine, here's what the FDA is saying about the 2023-2024 season. They met in March to formulate this based on their best guess of what would be in circulation in the fall. So again, whatever they're giving you have been formulated at least 6 months ago. March 7th, 2023 is when they came up with this recipe. This is a list of viruses that they're putting in there. Now, they say that they created their formula based on influenza vaccine production method. What does that say to you?
Influenza.
We're making the flu vaccine based on the production method. I always thought it was an algorithm based on the current virus that they thought would be in circulation. Like this one's on the upswing. It's March now. Maybe it'll really boom in September.
Yeah, we'll put the formulation together for that.
But what they're telling us is that it's not based on that. It's based on what they think they can just mix up. It's like they went in the cupboards. It's like, we got some of this, we got some of that. Like, let's just... Is that what that seems like to you? Based on production method.
It's like when I try to make dinner.
In there. Let's throw a little bit of...
Yeah, when I'm missing a few of the ingredients.
Okay, yeah.
I'm going to make waffles. I don't have the eggs or flour.
They're going to be like vaccine. What are those people called? Sommeliers or whatever? Vaccine tasters. Like, they taste like there's...
Vaccine tasters. Well, I'm glad you brought up the idea of vaccine tasters because each year the flu vaccine is not clinical trialed. They can't do that. In fact, they don't have enough time. Instead, here's what they look for is quality control. It says each vaccine undergoes quality control tests, like testing for sterility. But they do not test this specific formula in clinical trials. So when you go to get your flu vaccine, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying this is what you need to know. How was it made? Based on what they had in the cupboards. And was it clinical trialed? No. Now about COVID and the COVID vaccine, do I need to say it? The World Health Organization says we have a new Omicron variant called EG.5, and it's popular in the US, even though there's no indication that it's more contagious or dangerous. In fact, Johns Hopkins isn't even tracking COVID data anymore, and the CDC is not tracking case numbers. They're only tracking deaths and hospitalizations. Here is the most recent hospitalization rate in the U.S., quite low. Here are death rates. And then again, keep in mind that the CDC has recently admitted that they often equate deaths of people who die from something else as COVID deaths only because they test positive. So that's why we see this number plummeting.
Well, and we have to assume they do the same thing for hospitalizations and all that. Like you're in there for something else and, oh, you happen to have COVID.
Yes. So again, for this risk level.
But then you die of COVID.
With COVID, yes.
With COVID. You're here because of a car accident and you may not make it. Oh, and you have COVID and then you die. You're dying because of COVID.
Right. But don't forget, don't bank on that federal funeral relief fund that the president rolled out because
exactly.
we massage these numbers however it fits our purpose. Again, we've covered many of the risks of the COVID vaccine. Hopefully by now you feel comfortable in your risk assessment for your personal family. But when the media tells you that it is highly effective, we've shown many times that studies just don't seem to support that. Here's a new risk that was published in a preprint study awaiting peer review. That was an alliteration by Peter McCullough. Preprint study published for peer review by Peter McCullough.
Wow, say that 5 times.
No, I will not. I said it one time well and one time not. So this is a new study that's making strong associations with death from myocarditis. I'm just going to leave the link for you in the newsletter tomorrow, given the limitations on what I can say here. But remember that
I had my finger.
Yeah,
I had my finger hovering over the mute button because
I'm not gonna read it. I'm only gonna show it to you. Again, remember the last time Peter McCullough published his autopsy study for peer review, The Lancet kicked it off, wouldn't even peer review it. So again, there's only so much we can say about that on YouTube. So make sure you're subscribed to the newsletter because I'm going to link you to this tomorrow.
Maybe we should ask Peter to come on the show tomorrow. What do you think?
Okay.
Well, yeah, let's see if we can get Peter on the show. Peter, if you're
about
watching.
Both of these studies, sure, I would like it. So again Trippledemic.
The Lancet.
Go ahead.
One of the most published doctors in the world kicked off the Lancet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That just blows my mind.
Yeah.
Okay, so Trippledemic, how will you deal with it? Will you get a triple? Will you get a triple shot? Will you get a triple anything? Let us know if you think I misinterpreted this data. Let me know in the chat below.
A triple Indy, a triple Lancet. We got more news to get to here on this Monday. We're going to speak to a family member of a 9/11 victim, and that family wants answers, and it may shatter the narrative. And this is such an important story because it could be the one chance we get to really get answers through an investigation at a court level as to what actually brought down those towers that day. Because how else are we going to get it? Really, the only way is through the court system right now. Everything else has been stonewalled and silenced. So wait until you hear our discussion with that member, that family member, in just moments. We'll get to that. But first, are you an investor looking for an easier way to trade some stocks? And would you like to get 16 free stocks? Of course you would. Our friends at Moomoo, which is our favorite trading platform, there's no steep learning curve. It has a simple interface. It's easy to use, so even beginners can take advantage of the stock market in no time at all. Plus, right now, you can get up to 16 free stocks when you open your account and make your initial deposits. All you need to do is go to that link on your screen. It's just redacted.inc/Moomoo, MOOMOO. And the app is really great. I have alerts set for different companies that I follow, different commodity stocks and gold, silver companies, producers, different minerals producers that I like to buy and invest in. And I'll get alerts sent to me throughout the day with different earnings reports and data. And it's really great. You can set all those alerts up for your portfolio. And it really has all sorts of pro features that they give to you for free. Other companies charge you for them, and they give them to you for free. So right now, open your free account today. Get access to 0 commission trades, 16 free stocks, including either a Google stock or a Tesla stock when you open your account. That's right, and make your initial deposits. To learn more, check out our link. Go to redacted.inc/Moomoo. Again, that's redacted.inc/Moomoo today.
All right. Well, in the age of cancel culture at big universities, Stanford was able to successfully host a conference of Nazis. I want to juxtapose this story with first telling you another story. Back in March, here's what happened when Stanford Law invited Judge Kyle Duncan of the Fifth Circuit to speak in a talk about COVID, guns, and Twitter, and watch how he was received by people who wanted to cancel him.
Yeah, and to this room, because you're asking into the room as well. Is that okay?
Associate Dean, what would you like to say?
It's a great.
Okay, because you are also talking to the room.
You asked for an administrator. She is an administrator.
You just asked for an administrator here.
He's about to defend himself because he's been heckled. He was invited to speak here.
Can I say something to you? Is that okay?
Watch what he says here.
So you've invited me to speak here, and I'm being heckled nonstop. And I'm just asking for an administrator to sign the
That's an administrator.
That's the tolerant left. Your racism is showing. I heard someone yell out, "Your racism is showing."
Yes, because he's saying, "You're an administrator, I'm asking for help." And she says, "Yes, I'm an administrator." She gets up and says, "Yeah, we're a community. You're upsetting them by being here. I'm wondering if the juice is worth the squeeze." What she says is, was it worth upsetting this community for whatever juice you're going to give us? Because everyone here is so upset with you. And he's like, "Oh, you're the administrator? I'm asking for someone to solve it." And they're like, "That's racist," because, she wasn't solving it. It was not anything about her race or gender. This got so out of hand that Stanford's president and dean of the law school had to apologize for the judge. The judge said he wanted these law students punished, but Stanford didn't exactly do that. And boy, do I hope that any of them, if they graduate as law students, have to present a case in front of this judge later.
I was just thinking that same thing.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember you.
Such a great idea.
What my position
judges
is, right? Yeah.
Right. But if you're a law student, now why was he heckled like this? Because he deliberately, they say, misgendered a defendant in court, and some of the other ways that he has ruled lately offends their sensitivities. Here's a flyer or two asking people to show up and stop this event from happening. They wrote letters. Now, okay, so that's what happens when a federal judge is asked to speak to a law school about current legislation and sort of the thinking of the time that can help prospective lawyers. Now, let's juxtapose this with what happened last month when Stanford hosted an event featuring actual Nazis from the Ukrainian Army's Azov Brigade. Okay, nothing happened. The event took place as scheduled. That wasn't actual footage. That was a joke. Here's the flyer for the event. And here's the panel happening just nicely without the same hullabaloo that the previous judge got. Later, the host of the panel, Stanford philosopher Francis Fukuyama, posed for photos with the group. He was asked about this later. Now, he was pushed, like, "Hey, do you think you want to be hosting panels with Azov members?" And here's what he said in a response to the San Francisco Chronicle. "Oh, I think you need to do a little more reading on Azov," he wrote. "They originated amongst Ukrainian nationalists, but to call them neo-Nazis is to accept Russia's framing of what they represent today. By the time they defended Mariupol, they were fully integrated into the armed forces of Ukraine and are heroes that I'm proud to support."
Sorry.
Yeah.
I like that. Just like, no, they can't be Nazis because they love Ukraine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like just that one thing, like Russia like crosses the border and suddenly all the Nazism just vanishes.
By the time they're
let's rethink this.
Right. By the time they're fully integrated into the armed forces of Ukraine, they're now heroes. No. What that means is they've completely taken over. They're involved, as we've reported here multiple times, at every level of government. So this is not some fringe group.
Right. So he encourages us to do a little more reading. We have done our homework on Azov Group. Maybe I blanked on the part where they're the good guys, because they have been killing civilians since 2014 at least. But the ideological war is way older than that. Even Ukrainian President Zelensky couldn't answer for them when he was asked about it on Fox News in a video that Fox News then went on to delete from their website. We still have a copy. Watch Brett Baer over at Fox News actually asking Zelensky about the Azov's Nazi history.
I want to have you clear something up for us, and this is these reports about the Azov Battalion that is said to be Nazi-affiliated organization operating as a militia in your country, said to be committing their own atrocities. What should Americans know about that unit, about those reports?
So Azov was one of those many battalions. They are what they are. They were defending our country. And later, I want to explain to you. Everything from all the components of those volunteer battalions later were incorporated into the military of Ukraine. Those Azov fighters are no longer self-established group. They are a component of the Ukrainian military. Back in 2014, there were situations when our volunteers were encircled, and some of them did violate laws of Ukraine. And they actually were taken to court and got prison sentences. So law is above all.
Yeah, so I'll tell you later, he says. It is what it is.
Can I just throw out an analogy here, like just a thought experiment? So if you take poison, which is poisonous and bad for you, and then you take milk, which is not bad for you at all unless you're like lactose intolerant, when you put the poison in the milk is now bad for you. It has become poison milk.
Right.
That's just how this shit works. So if you take a poison element and you just mix it into your normal military, it has not counteracted the poisoned element. You just poisoned the military.
It's not good now.
Exactly. Like just like with the United States military, when you allow it to be infiltrated by, whatever gender ideology and lowering health standards, lowering mental acuity tests to get into the military, lowering fitness tests to get into the military, you're poisoning the military. You're lowering the military standards.
Yeah, I don't think that's the same though. When you're
no. And then if you also added Nazis,
this is the
and then add Nazis in.
Of allowing the KKK to then just be mixed in the military and running parts of the military.
Yeah, that's a good. Okay,
that's what
that and the lower health standards and the trans soldiers.
That's also not a good thing, but not apropos of this segment, Clayton. Okay. You sit out for a second.
And Rachel Levine.
Okay, stop.
I see what you did there.
Okay, so let's circle back around on this one since he said, I'll tell you later, and he did not circle back. Azov are followers of Stepan Bandera, who was a Nazi collaborator during World War II. Here's how the CIA described him in 2020, saying during the 5 weeks of the Bandera state, more than 5,000 Ukrainians, 15,000 Jews, and several thousand Poles were destroyed. It was founded by Andrei Beletsky, who advocated a crusade on the white nations of the world against the Semitic-led subhumans. The fact that Azov is a concerning group is not controversial, or at least it wasn't until the war started in 2020. Now the entire West has to pretend we did not know that Ukraine had this Nazi problem and was not attacking people in the Donbass with impunity. So how then did an event like this go over so smoothly at Stanford? I am not advocating that those people should have been heckled like Judge Duncan, not at all. They should have the right to speak and defend whatever it is they say. I am for free speech. And if I have to be for free speech, I have to defend even speech I don't like. I am advocating that someone show up and challenge them in a peaceful way. I am wondering why a liberal Research One university is comfortable hosting something like this. Now, here is an analysis that I really liked a lot today from the World Socialist website, saying that Stanford is one of the most prestigious schools, and so for them to provide a platform for Azov Battalion in an event sponsored by this group, it's insignia associated with fascism. It's like, how did this even happen? This is the crux of the piece, saying it was held clearly not to attract a large audience because it was summer. Yes, that one. Thank you. The faculty at Stanford, though, or for that matter, any other universities, met the appearance of Ukrainian neo-Nazis and fascist insignia with a collective shrug. Stanford has not even bothered to respond to repeated inquiries about the university's position regarding the Azov event, prominently displaying the Wolf's Angel. This is a Nazi symbolism. This is particularly stark manifestation of a far broader phenomenon, 1.5 years into the war of Ukraine, which has cost hundreds of thousands of lives, that there's not been a single serious discussion organized on campus by faculty on the historical and political origins of the war, much less any meeting in opposition to the war. These are colleges. No one on colleges anymore is speaking on behalf of peace. This is where we are. Instead, NATO officials and warmongers, as well as Zelensky and all of those and his, merry band, has been paraded on U.S. campuses. An international anti-war meeting series proposed by the IYSSE in the spring was met with Semitic attempts at censorship by Ukrainian far-right nationalists. So again, the fact that, here's the last point, neo-Nazis are now paraded on campuses of leading academic institutions in the U.S. must be seen as an alarming sign of the extent of the rightward shift of both the bourgeoisie and significant sections of the middle class and academia. Serious intellectuals, students, and young people must draw far-reaching conclusions. So I think that this is worth looking at because universities, which were once a hub of peace protesters, now are a place where culture wars are started, so we can scream at judges in the name of peace, but actual peace conversations are canceled as anti-Semitic and warmongering is actually showing its face. Let me know how you feel about that in the chat and anything you might agree with or disagree with about this.
Unbelievable. Way to go, Stanford. Standing up for what really matters. Let us know in the chat about that.
Now, incidentally, if you, like us, have children who you're thinking about, where am I going to send my kids to school? Because this is some BS right here. I like to follow an organization called FIRE, F-I-R-E. It's a free speech organization. They stood up for Judge Duncan when this thing happened, saying you owe this guy an apology. You must stand for free speech. They cover this type of thing. They rank universities globally and in the United States. So if this kind of thing concerns you about college campuses, like it does very much me, we're about to have a teenager in a few days, follow FIRE organization.
Indeed. Okay. For our next segment, we're going to have to move over to another platform. We are going over to Rumble. You can join us if you'd like. And we're going to be fully over there because what we're about to talk about, YouTube is not a fan of and will probably shut us down. In fact, we ran a segment a couple of weeks ago similarly, and they shut us down for it. So for this next segment about 9/11, we are going to be moving over to Rumble specifically. It's totally up to you if you'd like to join us. We can't tell you what to do under the terms of service, but you're free thinking. Our channel over there, though, is rumble.com/redacted. It's totally up to you where you would like to go. In your free time. You're a free thinking person, but we are going to do that segment over there in a moment. So get prepared. But first, it is no secret. If you're tuned in, then you know experts are predicting a recession heading our way. Layoffs are happening, and the government is ready to print more money, further devaluing the U.S. dollar. And last year was terrible for most investors, and it really... unless you were in precious metals, actually, and if you actually had real estate assets, unless you were smart and you invested in gold, then you were protected from losses while other investments fell. Now, if the experts are right and we get hit with a recession, 2023 is looking even better for gold.